The duty log for Observation Post Karen reads 11 words for the night of October 14th. Op Karen, SSGT. Vickers on station. No relief requested. 2211 words. I was the XO who typed them, and I have read them so many times since that the paper is soft along the fold. She came to us 3 days before that entry. I was in the O4 briefing when she arrived. Colonel Draven was running the morning update. 40 officers on folding chairs, the projector map glowing on the back wall, and he had the new assignments sheet in one hand and his coffee in the other. He read down the list the way a man reads grocery receipt. Comm section this posting. Logistics that one. And then he paused, and I heard the half smile in his voice before I saw it on his face. Vickers, Mara T, Staff Sergeant, he said. Support assignment, OP Karen. Observation, and he glanced at somebody, then back at the sheet, Nainton oversight. A handful of officers laughed. Not all of them, but enough. OP Karen sat on a broken ridge above the eastern checkpoint, a 2-room concrete block with a rusted generator and a line-of-sight antenna that needed coaxing every morning to work. It was the kind of posting you gave to people you'd given up deciding what to do with. The men who drew it usually counted down days and said nothing about it later. She was standing at the back of the briefing room. I didn't know that at the time. I found it out when I read the sergeant major's notes afterward. He'd noted her entry time the way he noted everything. She had walked in 90 seconds after Draven started reading, taken a position by the rear wall, and stood there through the whole thing. She said nothing when her name was called. She didn't raise a hand. She just picked up her kit bag from the floor and left. Draven moved on to the next name before the door closed behind her. I could tell you I felt something. I could say I noticed the weight of what had just happened. I didn't. I wrote Vickers OP Karen in my notebook and moved on with the rest of them. That is the honest answer, and I have given it to myself enough times. Now that the embarrassment has worn down to something more like instruction. She had been at the post for 3 days when the eastern checkpoint fell. It was 0205 when the alert came in. A dismounted element, we counted 7 at first, later revised to 12, had come through the drainage cut north of the checkpoint wire. They were not announcing themselves. The 2-man team at the checkpoint went to ground behind the guard post, called it in, and the noise discipline dropped to 0 in about 4 seconds flat. The quick reaction force mustered at the motor pool and moved out. 11 minutes to reach the checkpoint road. Standard. Here is what the QRF did not know, because we did not know it yet. The drainage cut had a second arm that ran parallel to the access road for about 400 meters before it bent away. The element had split. The arm that hit the checkpoint was the smaller group. The larger group, we would count 8 confirmed, was sitting along the access road shoulder, in the dark, waiting for whatever came down that lane at speed. The QRF drove into them at 0219. First vehicle took a strike and lost power. Second vehicle braked, took small arms contact from the shoulder, and the crew went off-road into a berm to get out of the kill zone. Third vehicle stopped, 3 soldiers pinned in the cab, driver wounded. The radio traffic in the operations tent became very loud, very fast. We had 22 personnel strung along 400 meters of road in the dark, 3 vehicles out of action, and a QRF commander on the radio telling me his people could not move without the access road being cleared. I transmitted to every post on the eastern arc. I needed any available shooter with eyes on the road shoulder north of the checkpoint. I got 3 responses. 2 were negative. Personnel had no line of sight to the contact area. The third was OP Karen. She came back on the radio in a voice like she was reading me a weather report. Karen actual. I have the north shoulder. 400 meters. I count 4 in the open along the berm lip. Give me the word. I gave it. What happened in the next 6 hours I can reconstruct in 2 ways. From the radio calls logged in the operations tent, and from what she told the debrief team in a flat, even tone 2 days later, the way a mechanic explains what was wrong with an engine. I will give you both. The radio log shows the first 4 calls in the first 11 minutes. 4 position reports, each shorter than the last, each one a different grid reference. She was moving between firing positions along the ridge in the dark, not sitting still, not giving anything a fixed point to find. Each time she transmitted, it was to close something. She did not ask for confirmation. She reported results and moved. The debrief gives the rest. She had pre-walked the ridge her first afternoon at the post. She told the debrief team it was habit. She walked every piece of ground she was going to be responsible for before she needed it. She had noted 3 positions along the north face of the ridge that gave overlapping coverage of the access road and the checkpoint approach. She had paced the distance from each position to the road shoulder, 380 meters, 440, 510. She had noted the grade change at 440 that would require a hold adjustment in wind from the northeast. She did all of this on her first afternoon while the generator was being serviced because there was nothing else pressing, and because that was what you did. The element on the road shoulder did not know the ridge was occupied. OP Karen was documented as a two-person maintenance detail. The posting was in the rotation log as support only. Nobody on that road expected a shooter up there. She held the first 4 in 11 minutes. The remaining 4 on the shoulder scattered into the drainage cut. She let them move, tracked their line, and waited. At 0241, she reported 2 of them had come back out of the cut to retrieve a piece of equipment left on the road. She reported the result at 0243 and went quiet. At 0247, the QRF commander came back on the radio. His lead vehicle was mobile. The road shoulder was clear. He was moving his personnel to the checkpoint. The element that had hit the checkpoint itself was still in contact with the 2-man team behind the guard post. They had been exchanging fire for 40 minutes at that point. The checkpoint team holding a corner of the guard post with a wounded soldier and a radio that was losing battery. She repositioned to the east face of the ridge at 0251, a longer angle. Crossing terrain she had also pre-walked, and worked the checkpoint approach from that side until the QRF reached the gate at 0309. The QRF commander's words on the radio when the gate opened, verbatim from the log. "Karen Actual, that's all of them, we're in," she acknowledged. One word. The contact was over at 0311. 22 personnel from the road and the checkpoint walked through the gate. She stayed on the ridge until 6:05, when the relief element arrived and she walked down. 4 hours after the last shot. She did not come off that ridge until she was properly relieved, because the post was her post, and she was not going to leave it empty. The relief element leader, a young corporal named Marsh, told us later that she handed him the duty log, pointed out the updated position notes she had added during the night, showed him where she had marked the second arm of the drainage cut on the map, and told him to make sure the QRF route planning office got a copy of those notes before the next rotation. Then she walked down to the motor pool and began her scheduled generator maintenance. I did not sleep between 0205 and 0800. At 0730, when the reports were assembled and I could read them together, I walked to Draven's office and put them on his desk. He read them standing up. He got to the QRF transmission log first, then the debrief notes, then the position grid references. I watched him go through it the way you watch a man solve a problem he didn't know existed. He set the papers down, picked up the one page again, the debrief narrative, and read it a second time. "Pull her file," he said. I already had it. He read it there at the desk while I stood across from him. I watched his face. I am not going to describe what I saw on it, because it belongs to him and he is not the point of this story. What I will say is that he closed the file, set it on top of the debrief report, and said, "Get her to the compound now." I found her at the motor pool. She was on her back under the generator housing, a wrench in her right hand and a flashlight tucked under her chin. There was dust in her hair and a long smear of grease along her left forearm. She had not slept. I told her the colonel wanted to see her. She capped the flashlight, pushed herself out from under the housing, and sat up on the gravel. She looked at me for a moment with no readable expression. "Give me 5 minutes," she said. She showed up at the compound 7 minutes later in a clean blouse, dust on her boots, hair pulled back. She walked across the compound yard in the early morning light with the generator log tucked under one arm. Because she had not yet turned it in, Draven was standing in the center of the yard. I had told him she was coming. He had come out of the building to wait. He stood in front of her when she stopped, and he rendered a full formal salute. Not an acknowledgement, not a nod. The full 4-count formal. And I know that because I was standing 20 feet away and I counted it. She returned it clean. Then she held out the generator log to me and asked me to make sure it got to the maintenance officer. I took it. Draven said 2 words, "Your file." That was all. She looked at him for a moment. Then she turned and walked back toward the motor pool, because the generator work was not finished. I read the file that afternoon in the briefing room, alone, after everyone else had cleared out. I read it beginning to end. 11 years of it. 4 theaters, 2 classified postings I had not known existed. The incident at Narrow Pass that her record listed only as attached outcome, classified, and the call sign that appeared without explanation on the 3rd classified page, Fenline. It appeared 3 more times in the document. Each time it was followed by results. I sat in that room for a long time after I finished. What I keep coming back to is not the ridge or the road, or even the 22 personnel who walked through the gate. What I keep coming back to is the afternoon 3 days before, when she walked into the briefing room, 90 seconds late, stood at the back through the whole thing, and said nothing when the laughter came. Not because she had nothing to say, not because she was absorbing an injustice with grace, or biding her time, or waiting for her moment to answer. None of those framings are right. She said nothing, because none of it had anything to do with what she was there to do. She picked up the kit bag and walked to the ridge and spent her first afternoon learning the ground she was responsible for. She noted the drainage cut, the second arm, the grade change at 440 meters in northeast wind. She annotated a map and left a copy for the relief element and made sure the maintenance schedule was not disrupted. 11 years, 4 theaters. A file that took me 40 minutes to read. She had known what she was. She never needed the room to know it too. I keep the generator log. Not because she gave it to me. She gave it to me because it needed to go to the maintenance officer. And that was the most practical hand available. I keep it because of the last line she added. Written in the dark at some point during those 6 hours on the ridge, in the same dry logbook prose she used for everything else. Generator note for AM crew. Left side coupling is loose. Torque spec and binder. Shelf 2. She was on the north face of a ridge in the middle of a contact, and she made a note about the generator coupling so the morning crew wouldn't have to hunt for the spec. That is what a professional looks like. Not the 6 hours, the note.